Hello friends, welcome back. Today I am going to talk on a book that was very famous in the management world. It is a book about an automotive company, how that company grew up by the person who was once the CEO of that company, who grew up from below ranks and became positioned at the topmost rank. The person wrote a book about that company after around his retirement, and this is the book My Years with General Motors by Alfred Sloan Jr. That was a classic book at the time it was published in the 1950s and 60s. It was a classic, and some rates it as the best classic book ever written on management. It was written not by a theoretician, it was written by a man who practicalized management in one of the America's top automotive companies, the General Motors Corporation. So it is started with an introduction by Peter Drucker, who is considered as a topmost authority in modern management. So he says that there are two approaches of that of Plato and Aristotle. One is to governance, one is the constitutionalist approach, that is structured approach, and another is like the education of the prince. So one is a structured way of management like a hierarchy, and other is like the royal way. So there are two ways of management, he says. And he says Sloan, who is the author of this book, has criticized him for putting management before leadership. So that's more marks to the individuality there. So he wrote this book when he was grooming a set of people, and he collected his memories and wrote a book, and he published it almost after a period of 10 years to complete this book. He believed that the chief executive must not have friends on the job, and he should have a professional attitude. It was a time when the Ford Motor Company was doing business in America, and it was quite famous, and it reached a maturity phase and was in a declining phase laterwards. So Sloan was working in a company that was later became attached to the GM. It was sold to the GM, or rather brought by the GM as an accessory company, and so Sloan, the author of this book, became an official of General Motors. He was a person who had extraordinary respect for the people, and he was very much people-centric, and he respected the people. He was talking about becoming a professional manager. So he was interested in mainly two things as per the book. One was in automotive safety, and another was about a General Motors Institute, technical institute. He was concentrating his thoughts and focus on these two areas. Some consider this as the best management book written ever in the history, and this was that famous book, and it is written for experienced managers. So the main lessons of the book is that the manager should be a professional. The manager has a client to deal. He is dealing with the people with him, dealing is the client. Decision is taken as per facts. The job of the manager is not to like the people, he should change their mindset and make it all right. That is his attitude. So there are such rules. Leadership is not a charisma, it is not public relations, it is not showmanship, it is performance, consistent behavior, trustworthiness. The professional manager is a servant. Performance is more than the bottom line. It is like setting an example. You should understand the situation, and without understanding there will be wrong decisions. These are written in the initial introduction of the book and the chapter that follows it, and slowly the preface starts of the book by Alfred Sloan, and then the introduction follows. So he was the chief executive officer of the corporation, General Motors Corporation, in the final years of his career. So he was advocating and he made several committees to manage the company. General Motors have been a group management. The people manage, the group management concept was devised by him, and the General Motors company had the concept of annual model, which means every year a good model car has to be launched and they work towards it, or rather they should decide on a car every new year, or rather it won't complete in 1 year, right? A car even today it takes more than 12-15 months, and so those days it was not computerized, it took much more time. So that was the attitude of the company. And so General Motors type of organization coordinated in policy, and that was a decentralized way. It was the decentralized way, and combined with proper financial incentive, this concept is the cornerstone of General Motors organizational policy. So it depended upon decentralization as the policy. On the other hand, Henry Ford, the owner and the person who is behind Ford Motor Company, is more believed in a centralized organization and in a static car model, that the same product line are available and those are sold out. These people believed in a new model every year sort of General Motors. So the basic management concepts are developed using the areas of organization, finance and product. And this book has 2 parts. The part 2 consists of individually distinct sections dealing in some detail: engineering, distribution, overseas, war and defense product, incentive, compensation, other aspects. The first part deals with the basic principle evolved from his discussion, and it follows with the second part. So this is done from a logical point of view. So in good management there will be changes, and it's the ability to change that is the characteristics of a good management. Then I slowly proceed to the part 1. So in the early days there were 2 people who were considered leading people in the area of American automotive industry, Mr. Durand and Mr. Ford. Mr. Durand was the person behind General Motors later, and that another was Mr. Ford. Their methods were however in opposite poles. Mr. Ford was an extreme centralizer, but Mr. Durand an extreme decentralizer, and they differed as to products and approach to the markets. Durand believed in a variety in automobiles, but the other person believed in a fixed product line. So he had a central office surrounded by autonomously operating satellite companies. There were around 25 companies at that time. So Durand set up General Motors in 3 simultaneous patterns. That is the way he thought and worked for the company. First was variety in cars for a variety of tastes and economic level in market. That is variety in product design. This is evident from his cars. The second pattern was diversification. So different technologies like friction drive, that was then considered a potential rival of straight gear transmission. So he produced new technologies, and that caused variation in products. Third pattern was his effort made in connection with Buick to increase, that's the name of a car, to increase integration through manufacture of parts and accessories that make up the anatomy of the motor car. So these are joined together as a network. That was his attitude. And to fund, there was an investing banking group. So later they become part of the management, the story goes. So the stock option was available at that time, and there was a dividend per share available to the persons. So DuPont's is a management financial company, and they get involved in the history of this company. So it became a enterprise sort of company later. So DuPont had a business with the military businesses. They left that and joined a relation with General Motors. So General Motors was greatly influenced by DuPont in the initial days. So first was that Durand and the DuPont executive, they had joint control of the company. So the financial operative executive was available in decision making process, and third was a forecast of expected return. So you make an investment and they expect return for it. So fourth was that purchase would be made on better than asset basis. So these people introduced the concept of finance into it. So DuPont representative took over the responsibility of General Motors Finance Committee. There was a finance committee which controlled and took decisions in every matter, and that was a DuPont representative. The finance committee was made and they had critical decision taking capabilities. So this Sloan was initially with a company called HAT. They make anti-friction bearings, and that's how he came to the automotive industry. So that's how he came in finally when the General Motors took over that company. So he became part of the General Motors management. So he had connection with Ford also before, since he was connection with the supplier company. So since his father and he owned a substantial part of HAT, he finished with an important position in the stock of the earlier name was United Motors Corporation. Later that they joined General Motors. So later he joined General Motors as a vice president in charge of the same auxiliary companies that he initially worked for. So and the story moves ahead. So Durand and Ford were, as I said before, were two important people in the automotive business, and Durand's had very informal ways of doing business. So the story goes ahead that so automobile market after a brief rise in demand in 1920s, the story in 1920s, it went down. So there was a crisis. So at first he thought he will resign from General Motors and he should strive for some other job, but he continued there. So there was a break in stock market prices as well, since the economy went down. So that was the era, and something has to be done to solve that issue and normalize it. So this was the time when Mr. Durand slowly he left the company, and that caused Sloan's coming into the position in the senior management position. So there needed a new president to take the place of Mr. Durand, and that was being talked upon. So DuPont was a financial company, and Mr. DuPont, and there was a person's name, and he had no intimate knowledge of the automobile business. So it happens to be one of the old school who thinks that knowledge of the business is essential to a successful administration. So unlike modern management theories, these people believed in the old way that technical knowledge is quite needed for managing a company. So DuPont had about 36% of the total common stock of the General Motors Corporation. So when DuPont accepted the presidency, Rescobb, he became the chairman of the finance committee. These were two people involved with the finance aspect, and there's a person called Haskell, and this person Sloan, the author of the book. They became DuPont's right and left hand men. So these four people started handling the top management things after Durand left. So they developed it soon ended in a hierarchical organization. So it was inspired by DuPont that they went for a decentralized type of organization. General Motors needed to find a principle of coordination without losing the advantage of decentralization. So decentralization was causing problems, but they didn't want the centralization scheme. So they went for a policy of coordination. Coordination committee were set up, and coordination without losing the advantages of decentralization. So different companies that are managing themselves in between, like a holding company, they were joined together by coordination committees. That was the idea of Sloan. So he made an organization study based on his experience previously. That was how he developed the organization chart as we see in modern world that was developed during that time. So the finance part of the people, they needed a return of capital, whatever investment they made, they want a return, that is their attitude. And so he set up people to coordinate each branch. So each branch he kept coordinators. That is called decentralized operation with coordinated control. That is his policy. The policy of General Motors is decentralized operations with coordinated control. Meanwhile, Ford has got a centralized policy. So this plan was officially adopted in 1920, and the company started growing. It started making an organization chart like this. They made an organization chart as we see in modern companies. The chart was developed and the organization structure was developed, and different independent organizations, or rather holdings, were connected by coordinations, and coordination committees were set up. That is how it was managed. So Ford at that time, if you consider their competitor was Ford, so they were good in low price cars, and meanwhile General Motors, they were producers of middle and high price cars. So they want to compete with Ford, they have to do something in the low price segment. So they had a product of 10 cars, 10 cars in 7 lines. So there are 10 cars and 7 lines, and as per the pricing they are different. So they are looking for something to do, they have to compete with Ford. So they were not competitive with Ford in the low price field. That was a problem for them. So they started analyzing the situation, and they started to suggest something. So they first appointed a committee to study the low price field. So there was a coordination committee, and they appointed a committee. So they didn't change in the already successful models. They don't want to make any change. They want to make a study in the low price field. They appointed a committee. That's what they did first. So their objective indeed was to make money and not to just make motor cars. So that is objective, of course, to make money. So the problem was to design a product line that would make money. So they should devise a product line that will make money. That's how they compete with Ford. So they made a new product policy, and were designing the new car, as they say in the book. So they started for the new car. They believed they should make a new type of engine. They should do engine modification. That's what they told. This became known as the copper-cooled engine. So what it means is that there is an air-cooled engine, unlike the normal water-cooled engine. And Ford was parallelly doing the research in air-cooled stuff as well. They were trying to make something of that sort. And so the copper-cooled means it has got copper fins around in the radiator which transmit, right? You see in the radiator fins, right? So the engine, upon the engine also there are fins. The engine had fins upon that. So it radiates out air. That's the air-cooled way, not the lubricant-based. Modern is lubricant-based, and those days it was water-based cooling. So they tried that, but that was only partially successful, and it became a combination of both. The fin were present already, the copper cooled way, the copper fins. It was not copper cooled, actually it was water cooled. As it ended, the research didn't become successful, and that is the story behind the copper cooled engine research. So that was copper cooled, and the research was named copper cooled indeed, but it was not fully successful as described in the book. So that is what happened at that time, and so finally it was copper cooled as well as water cooled. That was the final consideration. So they lost time for research in copper cooled, and they would use it in competition in the low price high volume segment. That was the decision, that the new research stuff. And the story further goes that so he produced a sound approach to product line. So at the same time system was introduced into accounting and finance. It was a DuPont managed company, so accounting finance was carefully considered as well. So coordination by committee. So several committees were regarded as for the general office, the research and other sections. They were connected together. Use a sort of coordinators we appoint modern world. There's sort of coordination committees they made. So early steps of that was in purchasing and advertising where they tried out, and they were quite successful. The purchasing committee was appointed, and they mediated or settled in the problems in that. So other than that, there was a general technical committee appointed by them, and because the highest advisory body on engineering, it should become in the corporation. So they appointed study groups, they conducted seminars, and helped the research people, the group. So that's how it progressed, and that is the same chart they are showing again. The chart got modified, and so the financial control came into being, coordination of another order, that is financial control. So organization and product policy, they had two policies. So they had the common stock, debenture stock, and preferred stock. So that was another way of money management. So they send monthly reports from different areas to the person who manages the coordination committee. To the coordination committee analyzes that and reports the area, and they monitored and watched. So there were so many companies that were connected together by committees. So all these previously existing independent companies had banks. So when these are connected, they had established good relations with many banks. So their financial sector and relations with banks improved a lot. So they were able to develop extensive lines of credit, which could be drawn from any bank will give them loan, for example credit. That was the status, or that was the situation. So, and there was an inventory committee which they appointed, the purchase of inventories and all those sort of things. Then the production control. So the production control is like, we don't know how many vehicles are sold by the dealers, but the things, raw materials are continuously coming to the factory plant. So in modern world, the Japanese way is just in time the material come and they make and finish the product and send. Though in that era that was not there. So what they did was they reduced the amount of inventories. They did not allow the inventories to pile up. The storing charge all will increase, so they didn't do it. So these people made a relation with sales manager. They appointed a sales manager who had enthusiasm, and that he could forecast something. And so that is the first art of forecasting or predicting, and second is shortening the reaction time when the forecast proved wrong. If the forecast proved wrong, they will shorten the time or do something to solve it. So that sort of approach they made. So material inventories were kept to a minimum. That was the idea of those days, unlike JIT today, just in time control. So that is how they progress. The book goes further ahead. I'm turning on the pages and reading on the points that I read through the complete book. So another was, there are three elements in the standard volume approach. You have to judge whether a company is doing good or well. How much volume of cars they produce, they have to check. So these elements are volume, cost, prices, and rate of return on capital. Rate of return of capital is a financial factor. Other are volume, cost, prices. Yeah, prices also is financial indeed. So whether these objectives are met or not, they study and analyze. So gradually there is a transformation in the way automobiles are produced. So initially there was a period of before 1908 with its expensive cars was entirely that was of a class market. Then period from 1908 to mid 20s was a mass market and the mass manufacturing, and then it was by far the mass manufacturing, and the transformation was done. And after that period of the mass market served by the better and better cars, or might be thought as a mass class market with increasing diversity. So diversity was also introduced in it along with mass manufacturing. So that was the identity of General Motors, mass class market. So there were other factors. There was installment selling, there was used car trading, the closed body, and the annual model. These factors influenced the selling of cars as per the book. Installment selling, the used car trading, the closed body, the body became closed and car could be used in any climate. And the annual model, each year they devise or design or settle on a new model, decide upon a new model. So that was the area of around World War I, the early 1940s and 20s, and Then they introduced a K model, the General Motors, and it was successful. But still, the Ford Motor Company was in a very good position that these people found difficult to deal with. So the book goes ahead and talks about the transformation in the automobile market that time. Then there's a chapter 10, we are dealing with the policy creation as the chapter goes. So they made new policies as per the situation, the post-war scenario and all those stuff. So so that is his observations, Mr. Sloan's observation as the year progresses. He, along with the company, how the things changed and all those things. Then So 1923 to 25, the 3 years involved no important expansion of productive facilities in General Motors. Then a new period started in 1926 to 1929. So in the rapid growth in sales in 1925 indicated a need for additional investment in plant and equipment. So they now started thinking of expansion, of introducing new plans of the company, automotive company. So General Motors, different plans in their place, in their country. So early 1930s began with depression, the financial economic depression, followed by stabilization expansion in the middle of the decade. So the economic scenario changed, and so when World War II began, that was in 1940s, General Motors rapidly converted itself from nation's largest manufacturer of automobiles to nation's largest producer of war materials. They were involved in defense materials as well. So from 1946 to 1963, over 17 years, the planned expenditures raised a lot, and the cost has to be adjusted, and there was many other criteria so that they can maintain the cost punctually. So there was strike at that time. Labor issues started coming during that time, and they had to solve it. They had to settle it legally. They have to appoint a labor committee, and they have to discuss with the employees. Those sort of problems arise during that time. Now we goes to the part 2 of the book. That's the chapter 12, and that discusses the evolution of the automobile. It tells about the engine, and it tells about technicalities, the petrol, the high compression ratio, and anti-knock fuel properties, the research done in their area on petrol to improve the engine phases. Then the petrol octane number, that's the measurement of fuel octane number. The higher octane number is well rated. And the shape of the engine, they couldn't modify much, but yes, they tried to reduce change the shape of the engine and do research on tires. All these research happened there, and these were also done by General Motors, their technical engineering department. This research, intense research on this. And as I said before to you, there was an annual model change. Every year they want to do something new in the area of automotive for a new model. So in 1 year's time you can't do it, but that's how they start. So the main business is to determine the outline of a styling. At first, styling and engineering program is as in today's world. So then there's a kick-off meeting. The styling develops ideas in the kick-off meeting. Then the first few months they try clay modeling, and once the styling is confirmed, they try clay modeling, and when the clay is finalized, they decide for the chassis dimensions, confirm it, and then that's the final clay model approval, the design approval, and that's followed by the production area of fixing the dies and these fixtures, the first prototype making, and final the work goes from the product design to production area, as the book says. So final, now the tooling phase starts, and that's the same way in those days. Nowadays it's a bit different. It's more computerized and automatized and robotized, all those things. So that's the technical. Then the chapter 14 about the technical staff, the research department they are talking about. There was a separate huge engineering staff was arranged to control it. There was a general technical committee to advise. So initially they had no engineering staff, but advanced engineering and advanced research needed engineers in the committee as well. They appointed committee engineers. So overall engineering work may be logically viewed as falling in two areas. One centers on the product, another on the process. The product design and the process design. Process is regarding manufacturing, and product is in the design part of it. So they made the General Motors Technical Center, the research center, in 1956. as the book says. So that's about the General Motors Research Center. Companies have research center. Then they talks about the styling part of it, the styling, the deciding of the curves of the body, the initial design. So that is explained in those days how it was the styling. The styling is in clay modeling is involved, the wood pattern making, and that's before the prototype fixing in the engineering automotive industry. So they used to made pretty good, feel good products of aesthetic looks. And first they started making those. Then dealing with the dealers. Dealer is sometimes franchise, right? Franchise dealer, how to deal with them, that was a problem. So the person's high officials did be a personal visit to dealers, started personally talking and understanding them, make them feel important, and fixing the problem. That sort of stuff starts happening there. And so the story goes ahead about distribution network started developing, the service network and dealers network. They are independent people who are connected to the company, the dealers. So there were some legal laws also, legislation, rules were passed to prevent misuse or malpractice from the dealer's side or someone in between. Then the company further develops, and now it plans to expand. It became a global corporation. Global corporation, and it started making branches overseas. First one was in it was already having in United States and Canada. Then they started something there was something in France. They started in UK as well in later words. So they first started the corporation overseas. So that became an international company. Now they started making overseas, and that was in France initially, followed by UK. And that became a globally spread company that became huge to manage now. A lot of staff required, a lot of monitoring required, and there was an overseas committee as well. The overseas company, the overseas policy committee was also there, and that's how it was slowly managed. The overseas policy group held a meeting, the book says, on April 6, 1948, and discussed the conclusion reached at the April 5 meeting of the Financial Policy Committee. So financial policy was pretty in close with the technical people, so they make sure that the money they invested is important and it won't be lost. That was the sort of attitude of financial company along with technical people. So that's what the book says. In other words, in other cases other than this, they were involved in non-automotive stuff as well, like diesel engines and other sort of stuff, non-automotive, locomotives, appliances, aviation. They were initially involved, as the book continues. So it's coming to an end, the book. That's the review of the book, what it talked. It's an extensive review from me this time. So they had contribution to defense in the World War. It's a point to be noted. They contributed to the defense purposes in the World War for America. So for example, making trucks for the military and equipments and all those things. So then for labor relations, those problems started appearing, and personal and labor relations rules and committees were appointed. And that's how it talks about the book of the progress of General Motors. And so that's the words or books of a person who worked in General Motors and became reached in the topmost position as a CEO. And this was an instant hit in the United States when it was released all over Europe, and is considered as one of the best management books ever written. My Years with General Motors by Alfred Sloan. Thank you for listening. I hope the talks were of use to you and gave you a fairly good idea about how corporations work. I read the book and noted the points and thought of explaining it to you, connecting with a well clear idea in my mind, as I also belong to automotive sector in a manager's role. So it was a very interesting book when I bought it many years back, and reading after many years, it was again inspiring for me, and hope it was useful for you as well. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. Thank you.